we're being forced to reinvent ourselves, faster and more frequently than ever before. So reinvention is a skill that we need to master if we want to thrive in this, future of work that we're already in.
A switch point moment is a moment in time that fundamentally changes your life because of a connection you made with another human being. My name is Shawn P Neal, and this is the Switch Point Project. And welcome, Switch Pointers. Thanks for joining me today. As always, I am just amazed at the quality of people that we are blessed to speak to here on the Switch Point Project. Today is no different. I'd like to introduce you today to Saleema Vellani. Saleema is an award-winning serial entrepreneur and researcher, a keynote speaker, a professor, and she's the author of Innovation Starts With I. And when we say innovation starts with I, the I is talking about us. It's within us. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I met Saleema back in 2019 at the Centric Day of Innovation in Indianapolis. I got to hear her speak. And I've learned that at the age of 21, Saleema co-founded and launched Brazil's largest #1 language school to finance an orphanage and social development programs. And then shortly after, she co-founded and ran a leading online translation agency in Italy. She's been doing some amazing things, and that's just part of the story that we're going to share today. So, as always, take a quick listen to a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with Saleema Vellani. All right, and welcome back, everybody. And Saleema, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I really want to kind of get people started at this transitional piece, the period in your life that happened. It was back in 2015, and I know that you had been going through some changes with your work. I believe you had left a job that you were working, and there was a building fire at the place that you were living, and a lot of things that really began to contribute to what ultimately became the writing of this book. Would you just kind of help take everybody back to that 2015 time period and help us understand a little bit of what was going on in your world that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I was actually in 2015 in the stages of what I thought was proactive reinvention, but ended up actually being reactive reinvention, meaning that I took some steps in early 2015 to quit the job that, I thought was my dream job. And I was like, well, I want to keep doing my side hustle. And I also want to, it was a Silicon Valley tech company actually I was working for. And it was pretty cool. I'd go and teach entrepreneurs how to hire remote teams. I was partnered with WeWork. I was actually working for Upwork. It was a really, really cool job. And then I was, full-time co-founding a marketing agency. And then in the process of all of that, like within a few months, I was pretty stressed out. And even though I loved some aspects of marketing and the work I was doing, I was also learning quite a bit. But I also wasn't doing it in a way that was aligned to me and a way that was authentic to me. And so through all of that, interestingly, I ended up getting laid off from both of those jobs. And, it was like both of those things kind of were taken away from me around the same time towards the end of, or mid to end of 2015. And I was really forced to look inward, and I was also doing a lot of coaching work, a lot of healing, a lot of different events that happened in my life over that year. My house, this very home that I'm in right now, that I just purchased a condo, and it had a bad fire, and it was like, there's so many things. I had immigration issues. I was Canadian, but I didn't have permanent residency in the States at the time. So it was a lot of things that just kind of came one after the other on top of me. I went on this Eat, Pray, Self-Love trip to India, Bali, Thailand for a few months, and I was really trying to look inwards and try to figure out what's my purpose. When is this all going to stop? When is like my life going to pick up and be positive again? And so as much as I was doing all this stuff to pamper myself, massages, Ayurveda, yoga, meditation, I was trying to do all these things using all these tools, and they were helpful at the time, but I still came back really lost to figure out, like, what am I going to do? And it was only until I got denied entry into the United States when I was in Canada after that Eat, Pray, Self-Love trip that I wasn't able to get into the country. I was denied. And I finally got in the next day, but the officer said, I'll let you in for 2 weeks, and you better have the right paperwork and get a job and come back to Canada and go in with the right visa. And it was at that point I was like, wow, I can't keep doing all this like self-care in a way that just feels good. I need to get back into reality. And within those 2 weeks, I spent, I would say, about 8 to 10 coffees a day. I would meet with 8 to 10 people a day, have coffee with them, lunch, breakfast, happy hour, dinner. And I was meeting with everyone in my network that I knew, friends, ex-colleagues, just a ton of people that I said, well, maybe they can help me, like I'm going to tell them my situation, that I need a job that will sponsor my visa. And it was only in that moment where I was really, I was like, it's almost like rejection therapy, if you've seen the TED Talk by Jia Jiang, where you really just have to go out and you're like, you probably will get rejected, but maybe one or two of these people will actually give you what you're asking for. And luckily, I actually came out with a couple of job offers over those 2 weeks. And lots of rejections, but it's interesting how a lot of people were actually willing to help or connect me with other people. And it was only then that I was able to go through another sort of series of reinventions. It wasn't the final, I feel like it's like there's iterations. It's not like you just reinvent. It's like a process that takes sometimes years. And so it was then that I ended up landing a gig to do some work in the Middle East and North Africa on hydroponics for refugees and to improve refugee livelihoods. And it was amazing how I had no industry knowledge, but I came in as an outsider and I was passionate about solving that problem. I was displaced myself still. I still didn't have access to my own home. It was still under repairs from the fire. And it was just amazing how, that work, which ended up being really impactful, won an innovation award, led to more work on insect farming and hydroponics in Africa, and led to me working in design thinking and innovation, and sparked so many other things. Sure, it was not easy, but it's interesting how that series of life crashes or, life quakes turned into something positive.
Yeah. I think one of the misconceptions is that when we see somebody who's successful, we see them as having figured out all of the answers of their life. And what I love, it's like what I love about this is there was this real space that you were in. You were on this path, but you were kind of lost. Talk to us a little bit about what that feeling is like, because I think there are people out there, and Lord knows I've been through them in my time, where you're really starting to doubt. Like, what was that like for you when you're really starting to doubt the path that you're on and how you're feeling about where your life is headed?
Yeah, so interestingly, when I had some of those feelings, I would bottle them up and I would shut them down and I would not listen to my inner voice. And I earlier spoke about, reactive reinvention versus proactive reinvention. And I think I was waiting around for something to change, and until it did, when all those things were taken away, the jobs, the house fire, all of the things happened to me, and it was because I was waiting. I knew that something was not right. My inner voice was fighting with me, but I was trying to shut it down, and I was like, I'm just going to be a workaholic and just ignore those inner voices and just focus on, my work and my life, my social life, etc. But I wasn't really taking care of Saleema, me. And other people noticed. They would say some things, but I would be like, I'm just going to keep going. And I think really listening to our inner voice is key during those times, because the self-awareness of really knowing when something doesn't feel right. Is there something that can be fixed? Is there something that's just not aligned? And taking some time to really reflect on that. I think because of the way the world is changing, technology is changing, and everything is just changing so quickly in the world, we are also changing. When I was growing up, they'd be like, you are who you are. We don't change as people. And I challenge that, because I see how, we just see so many things changing. People are pivoting out of their jobs they're making big career transitions. We see a lot of families, divorces, just so many changes in relationships and people and what they want in their career. And I truly believe that the more that we listen to ourselves as individuals, what do we really want right now, will inform us, what we should do next and how can we reinvent proactively instead of waiting around for a life quake to happen the way I did.
Right. Well, and I remember you were talking about this 100 coffee challenge. Real quick, I'll ask you to explain that because I don't want to misquote it. So can you explain the 100 coffee challenge?
Sure. So the 100 Coffee Challenge was that period. It actually started, it wasn't called that at the time. It was when I was desperate to get a job in Visa. And I went and scheduled those 8 to 10 coffees a day over the course of 2 weeks. And I had at least 100 coffees with people in Washington, D.C. in order to find a job to support me. Because I was like, if I have to go back to Canada and I don't have anyone there, any kind of like, I don't have credit there. I don't have a home there. Like I have a lot of family there, but like I didn't have my network, my professional life, like everything was here, my immediate family, my home. And I was like, I just felt those constraints, and that's real self-innovation. You really have to operate under all these constraints and the time limits. I was like, I have to find a job and a visa. And so that's when the 100 Coffee Challenge was born, because it was a sprint to talk to 100 people. And I think the interesting thing there is that when it comes to self-awareness, I thought from all my knowledge at the time on self-awareness is that by spending time alone, you'll discover more about yourself. And what I realized was, even though I'd spent all that time in India and Bali and Thailand and wherever, it was only when I came back and I had those coffees with people that I realized that they were showing me who I was at the time. And I was not really aware of that, or I wasn't really open to that at the time. I was like, I don't want to do marketing. I don't want to do this. I want to do what I want to do. But like, it was interesting that they saw my skills or they saw my value through those conversations. And that led to those opportunities, interestingly. And I ended up repeating that 100 Coffee Challenge. I make my students do it to go get jobs or get internships. But I ended up repeating that. I would give it to my interns to go and find jobs. I'd give them 100 people in my network to have coffee with. I used it for my book, Innovation Starts with I. I used it for the book interview process. So that was really interesting. I've used it for business development. You can use it for sales. You can use it for so many different purposes, because essentially it's through other people that we make things happen. Even though we might start with why or analyzing the what or the how, but it's through the people that we know and the connections that we want to build that we make things happen.
Yeah, because we're biased. I mean, when it comes to our own self-interpretation and how we view ourselves, were there some difficult things in what we'll call your 100 Coffee Challenge that you had to come face to face with that maybe didn't settle right away? And when you look at those, how did you face some of the challenges? Because it's not always good, people just pumping you full of good information. Sometimes we hear things that it's like, oh, wow.
No, for sure. It was challenging initially to be vulnerable. I would say was the hardest thing, was going out and sharing what I was going through, because I was like, I rarely talk to these people or some of these new people that I don't know. How do I stay grounded and not tell them the drama of my current crisis, or that I'm contacting you because I need you, and make them feel like I'm using them because I need something? And it was really hard, especially for someone that tends to be more of a giver and has struggled a lot, like many people out there, to receive and to ask for help. And so it was kind of experiencing the other side, where I was like, well, let me try to figure out how to do this. But I realized around coffee 50 or so, or I don't know, somewhere in the middle of it, that the more I was vulnerable, the more I was starting to see results where people were really trying to help. For a while, I was just not really sharing my situation, and there was no urgency. There was just sort of like a let's catch up, and it didn't feel authentic. But I also was really scared to tell people the situation of my life quake.
I think you're really onto something with the fact that we don't necessarily want to ask people, or maybe is it to admit that we're in a space that isn't optimal, that we don't want that image of us to be that we're struggling?
Yeah, I think that the more that we practice vulnerability now, I think I've been listening to a lot of Adam Grant and Brene Brown on this topic for several years now, actually, and actually got to see Brene Brown twice in person, and Adam Grant as well. And interestingly, they talk about vulnerability and authenticity, but with credibility. And I think it's important, especially with new connections and impressions. You really want to think about, how can I be vulnerable in a way where you're not just pouring all your stuff out and trying to get people to console or to feel bad for you, but how can you do it in a way that's with credibility? And so even though I didn't know that at the time, I think when I was vulnerable with the people that I already had gained a certain amount of credibility with, it was much better, and they were more willing. Also, they trusted me, and we had a relationship. They were more willing to help. In many other circumstances, I've had weak ties. People that didn't know me helped me significantly more than my stronger ties. But in this particular situation, I found that, yes, the vulnerability with people that I had built some sort of rapport with, it all depends on how you practice it, right? How you story tell, how you frame the conversation. And I think through just those coffee challenge conversations, I learned how to be a better conversationalist. I learned how to better ask questions and listen. And I realized who I could, count on or follow up with or ask them for further connections. And who was just sort of like, okay, they're not really going to help, but maybe I'll get like one nugget out of this. So yeah, a lot of people told me it's impossible. Like it's going to take a long time for you to find something. Good luck. So then there were some people that were like, well, let's create an opportunity. And the opportunity that I ended up getting was created.
Yeah. And you're a risk taker. I get the feeling that you're someone who says, okay, here's a cliff and I know that I will have the parachute by the time I get to the bottom. I'm going to do it. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, very much.
So what is it when you're facing a new challenge, when you look at something that, has really, as you said, you went into this, what was hydroponics, and you didn't know anything per se about it. What is it that you're pulling from within that's giving you the strength to move forward despite that fear?
Yeah, so I think there is some level of intrinsic motivation there. So with the hydroponics and the refugee situation, it was interesting because I love food, first of all. So there was like some connection there. It was like, if there's a way to help people get the nutritious food they need, as much as it wasn't a industry that I had experience in, especially from the food security standpoint or agriculture, I could relate to the pain point of the refugees in some way. Obviously, it's nothing that I could really completely understand, but I could relate to the feeling of losing my home or being displaced, going through, an experience where one day you wake up and you no longer can access your home for several months. And so even though I can't compare it to their situation, I can say that I can understand. And so I can understand some level of it. And so I could also relate to my own parents who had to flee Tanzania in the early 1970s to come find a better life in, between London and Canada. And then their parents or their fathers who fled India in their generation. So it was like a family of like nomads, essentially, where we all had to kind of immigrate somewhere or find a new home, being forced to leave or being forced to sort of figure out what to do when you no longer can access your home or you wake up and you have to leave the country or something like this. And so essentially I could connect to it in some way, probably through my own family experience. But I also think, that there was definitely the problem solver sort of risk taker in me because I've solved other problems in the past that I didn't have experience in. I knew that I could learn quickly. And that was actually something I didn't know until it was the actual opportunity was handed to me. It was like, you're a fast learner. You figure out all kinds of stuff and you can just really do anything that you put your mind and your heart to. And just getting that feedback gave me the confidence to, it really empowered me to take on that problem. And because I'm also really into learning, it was also an intrinsic motivator for me to learn about something new that was exciting and interesting.
Yeah, and you're also hitting on the idea of resourcefulness and knowing how to pull in those resources that you have. Can you talk a little bit about that when you're looking at that, being faced with a challenge and yet knowing that you've got resources around you? How do you approach that, and how can you make the most of what you have to work with?
I think, when you're in that challenging situation, I think you just have to evaluate I like to use a tool, sort of like an impact effort matrix, to evaluate, well, what's the effort of using this resource and what's the impact or results from that? Because you also have to think about 100 coffees, for example, that's a lot of time, but something always happens. You can always get something out of the conversation. I even get a lot out of conversations when I'm in a mentoring position where I'm mentoring young people, and I learn a lot. So I think just going in really open, you can use any resource and benefit in some way and leverage it in some way. But I also think trying to figure out the impact based on the effort that you're putting in to that, because that is your time that you'll never get back.
Yeah. And so you've turned this since 2015, then you have taken everything that you learned, you've put it into a book. That book is called Innovation Starts with I. And if you can, just give us the high level overview of what somebody might expect to take away from that book.
Yeah, so if you are looking to reinvent yourself in some way, reinvent your business in some way, you're feeling a bit stuck, maybe you're doing everything yourself and you have a lot of passion and drive, but you're lacking direction, you're lacking the tools on how to make that pivot. Again, whether it's your life, your career, especially if you're an entrepreneur and this is your business that's in an early stage and you're figuring out how to like move beyond yourself, the book gives you all these tools. It gives you a lot of innovation tools that are used in such a way, created or adapted in such a way that you can apply them to your life, your career, your business to make that reinvention proactively instead of waiting around for a life quake to happen. And since we are living in this, what I call the reinvention revolution, we're being forced to reinvent ourselves, faster and more frequently than ever before. So reinvention is a skill that we need to master if we want to thrive in this, future of work that we're already in. And so yeah, the book essentially gives people the tools, and it also covers, each chapter has a different future-proof capability. There's 12 of them, and some of them are, self-awareness, empathy, intuition, originality, collaboration, storytelling, prioritization. Prioritization is huge, and I think that's one of my favorite chapters because it gives people, especially entrepreneurs, the tools on how to prioritize their time. That's something that we see people are busier than ever before right now, and it's just so important to have some of these capabilities, own them and really master them.
Oh, that's good. And one thing I'd love to touch on is this reinvention revolution, because, I remember back in, what was it, square wheel, wooden wheel days. I'm kidding. I'm not that old. But I remember back in the days, my parents' generation, it was 30 years and out. That was the saying, we go to work, we find the profession, we go to work, we spend 30 years there, and then we retire. Then we came into the era of job hoppers a little bit, and that was kind of frowned upon at first, and now it's been more accepted. Now we're in this reinvention revolution. And what does that look like to you as we look 10 years down the road for the average job seeker or person looking to get into an industry?
Yeah, so in the book, I talk a lot about hybridpreneurship, and I think a lot of people were seeing now more than ever before, a lot of people wanting to be entrepreneurs. I did interview 100 people, as I mentioned, for the book, including Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model canvas, Ariana Huffington, a ton of awesome people. And interestingly, what I found was that you don't have to pick a path between being an entrepreneur and intrapreneur. You can be both, be a hybridpreneur, and whether it means you're working some consulting gigs or working some part-time jobs or a full-time job while you build up your business. I think that most people will have businesses, by the next like 25 to 50 years, people will be having the business of themselves or a business that they're running on the side or something. I think the more that we can diversify our hats, so whether you're, you want to be an author, you want to speak about your story, you want to do some consulting, you want to do some coaching, you want to do some training, you want to, teach something or become an adjunct professor in some way. I think that the more you diversify your hats, which is actually maybe seen not so positively in the past, being a generalist as well. I think that right now it's a time for generalists to rise in this reinvention revolution. I'm a seasoned generalist myself, which was actually during my life quake back in 2016 when I was having those coffees. I got nailed quite a few times. People were like, "You do too many things," and you just have to know how to tell your story. And depending on who you're talking to and how you tell a story, and think about the purpose and how you can leverage your different hats in a unique way. And I think it's all about not so much just let's bring a new idea and launch this new idea. It's about original combinations. How can you leverage who you are with what you know, what you do, what your skills are, your experience, what people see in you, having that awareness. I think that's when you're able to really innovate and be successful, by wearing those different hats and finding that unique combination of yourself and everything around you.
So as we start to wrap things up here, I have a couple of more questions. The first one, I would love to know what you value most about yourself as a human being.
I would have to say I love giving and I love being generous and I love sharing with people. So I would say I really try to help as many people as I can, and something that I think I see pretty positively, and that, of course, does have its downsides, and it can take up a lot of time and energy, but I think ultimately that's probably one of my biggest strengths.
That's good. And when you think back to the challenges that you faced in 2015, 2016, was there one thing specifically that really surprised you to learn about yourself?
Yeah, I would say that as much as I felt awkward networking or having those coffees sometimes, or it wasn't easy at all. But I always say that, in my book, I talk about how your sweet spot isn't just discovered, it's developed. What you become good at or what you become great at, what you actually might become passionate about might not be the thing that you're initially great at. A lot of people think that, do what you're passionate about. I always tell my students, don't follow your passion. Find a way to discover and develop your passion and your sweet spot. And so back then, it was interesting that a lot of people were like, you're really good at like marketing and networking and building relationships. And I was just like, oh no, I'm not good at that. I feel so awkward at networking events. I want to hide, go to the bathroom, or hold like, a coffee cup and food. And I always felt awkward. I got a lot of anxiety sometimes having these conversations with people. I thought I sucked at marketing after all the issues I experienced in 2015. And so interestingly, I had this perception of myself, but other people showed me and validated that what I was seeing in myself wasn't true. And they were seeing this new sort of going to be soon reinvented version of myself before I saw it. And so I think listening to them and what they saw in me and asking really great questions was interesting, because then when I accepted it and I owned it, that's when I was able to start my current business, Ripple Impact, and it took off immediately, because it ended up becoming, even though it didn't feel right immediately, once we actually started making it happen, it was the best thing ever, and it's been very successful since.
Isn't it interesting? Our own self-perception and our own insecurities sometimes tend to be the things that are holding us back from our greatness. I love it. So I would love for you just to tell people how they can find you, how they can find your book. What can they do to stay in touch with you?
They can follow me. You can always follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I share a lot of content, as well as Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just my handle is Saleema Vellani. You can also follow my business, Ripple Impact. We do a lot of work with entrepreneurs who are trying to grow their businesses and their audiences and build their brands. And so we're like the team behind the scenes to many of them. And so that's Ripple Impact. And the book is on Amazon. It's called Innovation Starts with I, and it launched in November, and it's done really well. It's a bestseller, and it just won an award this week, and in line for hopefully another award pretty soon. So yeah.
Wow. I love it. That is awesome. Thank you. The book is Innovation Starts with I. Saleema, it has been a pleasure to have you on the Switchpoint Project. Please come back sometime soon, and let's dive into some more of these really cool topics like self-perception, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shawn. It's been a pleasure.
The Switchpoint Project is part of the Switchpoint Media Network. Switchpoint Media creates raw and revealing conversations that explore the intersection of self and social awareness, growth, and authentic human connection. For more great podcast and videocast, be sure to join us at switchpoint.media.